to Real Estate Live UK first week of events in 2021. Real Estate Live UK is a week-long programme of events brought to you by White Label and our partners. We will be hosting 3 weeks of events this year, the 2nd in June and the 3rd in October, promoting the strengths and opportunities of places across the UK. The programme seeks to keep the property and regeneration sector updated and engaged, and we have a fantastic programme of events planned this week to do just that. You can view more details on the sessions taking place this week on our website, realestatelive.co.uk, and I'll let you know about others taking place today at the end of the session. Before we begin, we will be launching a short poll on what will be the most significant trend for regeneration professionals in 2021. There are a few options now on your screen, so please take the time to read through these and submit your answer. And while you're taking a few minutes to do that, the panel will be taking questions from the audience, so please submit your questions through the Q&A function on the taskbar at the bottom of your screen. I am now delighted to introduce the chair of the panel, Joanne Dennis-Jones, National Head of Planning at GL Hearn. Over to you, Joanne.
Thank you so much, Julie. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to Real Estate Live. I hope you've managed to catch up with a few of the events that we've had across the week. And for the next hour, we'll be discussing planning for recovery in 2021 and beyond. And we'll focus on the role of the planning system. And I'm your host today. So we have a superb panel for you. And I'm really looking forward to them sharing their practical experience and expertise on this topic. Now, in preparing for today, I decided to have a look at the Collins Dictionary word of 2020. Now, as you can imagine, there were quite a few candidates, including coronavirus, pandemic, etc. But the one that came out was lockdown. And the reason that was chosen was because it was a word that encapsulated our shared experience of billions of people over the past year. And really, the lockdown has affected how we work, how we shop, how we study, how we socialise, how we live. And for me, that is planning. That's all about planning. And we often don't know we're talking about town planning with our friends and family, but we're all talking about town planning every day and how it affects our lives, and particularly over the last year, ever more so. 40,000 responses to the planning white paper is a really testament about the passion that we have in this industry. And so I'm delighted to be hosting today. And planning is the interface between the public and the private, between citizens, governance, and I'm really ready for our guests to talk about their views on investment, innovation, and what that change is in our built environment, and in particular to touch on town centres. So let's crack on. If my panel can appear as in magic and we can all work the right buttons, that would be fantastic. So if you can meet them all and they will introduce themselves. So perhaps Linda, shall we start with you?
You know, I knew I was going to end up going first. Anyway, good morning, everybody. I'm Linda Schiller. I'm the CEO of Harworth PLC. I joined the business in November 2020, in the week of the second lockdown. So it's been a really interesting experience going into the business as CEO in the pandemic. I'm sure we can talk a lot about that as we go through this. What are Harworth? Well, we're a pretty unique business. We're a master developer with a significant strategic land bank, and we deliver service residential plots and commercial space into the market. So fundamentally providing sort of supply into two parts of the market where there's real structural undersupply. Our purpose is to create sustainable new places where people want to live and work. And we operate in Yorkshire, the North East, the North West and the Midlands. And I've got teams based in each of those regions. Our current strategic land holdings have the capability to deliver 30,000 new homes and 27 million square feet of industrial and employment space. Roughly a third of each of those buckets is consented.
Failed at the first hurdle on mute, didn't I? Goodness me. Okay, thank you very much, Linda. Hugh, over to you.
Hi, I'm Hugh Ellis, and I'm Director of Policy at the TCPA, the Town and Country Planning Association. We're 125 years old, and at this point during COVID, I think I've been alive for most of that. We're an organisation that's quite small. We like to think of ourselves as what's left of the British utopian tradition, and we've got a wide range of interests in health, in art, in culture, in climate change, and we're working across all of those fields, I guess, on planning. But the briefest description of where I'm at is in a career-ending podcast that I recorded called Two Tea Bags to Utopia. which sets out very clearly that I am the least most influential person on planning reform in the whole of the UK. And there are, in fact, bacteria in the ice caps of Mars who've had more influence on government. However, we try at the TCPA to have influence over the future of town centres and civic space and community and democracy as well. So that's what we're about.
Hugh, hopefully you've got a few more hits on your podcast after today. So thank you for that. It's brilliant. David, over to you.
Hi, my name is David Ogamiwa. I'm an architect and urban designer. I also hold a number of strategic advisory roles, including for Urban Design London, the Architecture Foundation recently, Historic England, and the GLA. I run a small architecture and urban design practice called Architecture Doing Place, and as the name suggests, we are mainly focused on placemaking, housing, and arts and cultural projects. And I'm a confirmed urbanist. I think it's important to say in the context of this conversation.
Fabulous. Thank you, David. Jessica.
Thanks. I'm Jessica Bowles. I'm the Director of Strategy at Bruntwood. Bruntwood is a regional commercial property company operating across the cities in the north and in the Midlands. We are a little bit different from some developers. We take a very long-term view, investing in the cities, developing property, and then continuing to own them and let them directly ourselves. So we work really, we see ourselves as very centred on our customers, and that gives us a really interesting insight into how the market's moving and what people want from the spaces that they're in, but also the communities that they're part of, which I think is an interesting change that we've seen happening over the last 5 to 10 years. We also have a joint venture with Legal and General Capital, which allows us to develop specialist science and technology facilities, particularly within innovation districts. Most of those are city-based innovation districts, but we also own Alderley Park in the Cheshire countryside, which is a different sort of place that we've been placemaking and transforming into a multi-site, a multi-business life sciences site. So that's who we are and that's what we do. And I'm sure we'll pick up on lots of the themes that come up through the discussion. Just to locate me a bit in this, I'm not a planner and I'm not a surveyor and I'm not a property developer by background. I spent 15 years in the civil service and about 10 at Manchester City Council. So I come from a public sector perspective, but it's very interesting to work in a business where you have very different set of levers, but some of the same ambitions.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Ian.
Good morning, Joanna. Good morning, everybody. I'm Ian Fletcher. I'm one of 2 directors of policy at the British Property Federation. My co-director is called Jon Fletcher, so that always creates no end of confusion and hilarity. But my focus is on built environment, so planning, development, sustainability, housing. And the British Property Federation is the trade association for the real estate investment sector. It's been there 19 years. You can see sort of the grey hairs and the beard, but it's I can honestly say I've never had a dull day. It's absolutely fantastic and fascinating sector. Does tremendous things, I think, in terms of both creating places and buildings and long-term stewardship of those places. So I come at it from that angle.
Brilliant, thank you, Ian. Well, I must say you're very well behaved because we're already right on time. So congratulations for the opening to manage to do that for everyone who's kind enough to dial in. So excuse me, without further ado, let's go on to some of the questions. And I think, you know, what's been really topical this week has been the Prime Minister's announcement on our roadmap. And at the press briefing, he was asked about the future of cities. And he talked about the pandemic would accelerate some trends, opportunities to turn offices into residential homes, and also talked about his experience with the remote working, that people were really keen to meet up in person. He talked about the cities will be filled, you can imagine Boris, I can't do the hair, be filled with life and buzz and excitement again, and talked about the agglomeration effects of those cities being amazing again. So, the question to the panel, and perhaps Jessica, I'll start with you first, was really, do you agree with his view? Do you think workers will be pouring back into our cities? And how far perhaps should we go with bringing housing into those spaces and places?
Yeah, I mean, it's a brilliant question, isn't it? And right from the beginning of, fairly early on in the first lockdown, that discussion about our cities dead, is the age of the office over, was sort of one of those headline topics, wasn't it, really, that got everyone going. And I think if you'd asked me that question, you'd asked a lot of people that question earlier in the pandemic, you might have had a more mixed response. But as time goes on, I think the value of coming together, of seeing people, of interacting in much less formal ways, actually, than you have online, is seen as much more important. And I think that need to interact and come together will always be there. I think it's part of the human condition, actually. I went, probably my last holiday before holidays were a thing of the past, was to Italy, and I went to Pompeii, and I was absolutely overwhelmed at the similarities between the substance of cities from that far back in time, from thousands of years ago. People still wanted to come together for leisure, to do business, to share ideas, to eat, to socialise, to wash themselves. There was a real commonality of human experience that I don't think will go away. And I think that cities, and you could say, well, towns do that too, but the density of a city and the opportunity that gives, both not just for businesses, but for individuals to develop and to grow and to develop professionally and personally, is overwhelmingly important. And so I do think cities will outlast the pandemic. And I think that it will be very interesting, and we'll probably come on to this later, about the balance between, how much office space will be required in the future. I mean, as an office provider, we're not seeing lots of people wanting to take a lot less space. What people are saying to us is, how can we use this space differently? What do we need our space for? How do we facilitate those experiences that we know from our business perspective need to happen? How do we create productive, collaborative, innovative, creative environments for our staff? And so I think that's going to be a question that we keep on needing to come back to, between planners and developers, architects, designers, the people who use space over the coming months. But I'm optimistic for the future of cities, and thankfully, because I love them.
Thanks, Jessica. Who wants to come in next? Maybe Ian?
Yeah, I think in the pandemic, I think people have gone very much local, and there's a great appreciation, I think, out there, a far greater appreciation of the things that we perhaps take for granted, whether that's local shops, our homes, the parks and other outdoor spaces that perhaps we've not used as much as we have over the last 12 months. And so I think that, this would be the wrong moment to sort of impose policy from on high. I think what we need to do is to very much harness that great interest that I see in local. And that means having proactive local plans, rather than some of the suggestions that are coming forward from government for things like permitted development rights. The huge challenge in that is always, I think, then the capability at a local level, and that's no reflection of, I think, will. It's generally usually a reflection of resource. We simply don't invest enough in the planning process. But I'd not like to I don't think I'd call the sort of death knell of the retail sector. I think the retail sector will come back strongly. It'll be a very different retail sector. I think there'll be a lot of entrepreneurs out there wanting to start up independent shops. We may end up with a lot of different uses in the town. So I've got members who would like to put out healthcare facilities in town centres. I've got members who would like to have distribution outlets in town centres. So I think our town centres will be reshaped, but hopefully they'll be done in a controlled way, and one that is informed by local people.
Can I come in, Joan, on that? Because I think actually that's a really good point about how you can't reshape a city, sort of in a couple of years. And with Jessica, I think people, certainly in my business and most businesses I've spoken to over the last few months, people are really ready to come back into a work environment. They're looking forward to it. They just might not still want to do it 5 days a week, because I think one thing that has come out of COVID is an acceptance that people, will work from home for some of the time and will work in an office for some of the time. But that people meeting sort of people in the flesh, being able to socialize with people, is something that is actually sort of right at the top of the agenda of many businesses, actually, when they talk to their people. And there's a big well-being sort of piece to that as well. I think, will we start to gradually get back to normal? Yes, it might look a bit different, but yes. But I think in terms of how you evolve the cities, so, if you're really pessimistic, the death of retail, and I don't want to call it that, but just to illustrate, potentially throws up a lot of space on high streets. And I can understand why both local government and central government are really concerned about that and actually looking to see how they can actively repurpose that. But I think that takes time, and I think it takes planning. I think we've got to be really careful to make sure that the cities that we create, if we start to sort of change cities and we start to bring more residential and other uses in, that actually we are still creating places where people want to be. So whether it's where they want to live or where they want to work, and we think about sustainability, sort of in a really strong way. We think about how we green cities. I don't think converting offices to apartments is necessarily the right answer. If we did that everywhere, it might be the right answer for part of cities. But also you've got to think about, the multi-generational society that we have, and creating, and how you create communities and how you make it a lot more inclusive, sort of in terms of opening cities up. So to me, this is only something that you can really achieve by the public sector and the private sector working really in partnership to come up with a plan, because actually the ownership of a lot of city centres is really fragmented. They rarely sit under one single sort of institutional investor. It will be a whole variety and range of investors. So to sort of move that forward over time and create, the place that we want to be and the place that we may want to live, I think takes a lot more thought and focus, and actually government money incentivising the right behaviours.
Thank you, Linda. There's a lot there to go at. Hugh, I didn't know if you wanted to come in as well.
Just really quickly, because I agree with all of that. I think you have to have a guiding hand. I think the future of cities is bright. The future of civic space, from a cultural, artistic and economic point of view, if you can get that right, is extremely bright. But I think it boils down to a really powerful choice that I don't think the Prime Minister framed properly at all, which is that it's not simply about whether or not you get more people living in town centres. It is about that issue about quality and standards and whether or not you've created a whole place. And I think the record has been, I never thought I would see the creation of slum housing through permitted development in the last 6 or 7 years to the degree I have. Stood and looked at it, and you've seen the outcomes for people, children playing in car parks as a result of it. Let's be clear. The choice presented by the government is either one where we walk away from that kind of investment in the whole place to a kind of chaos, or whether or not you have this guiding hand of private-public partnership. And that is actually the only way that it will move forward. The only other thing I'll say, just to add to what people have said really, is that there is also this incredible climate challenge. So once we've got through COVID, we will need to completely re-engineer our cities for climate resilience, for zero carbon on the one hand, but also from a livability point of view, which will be the most extraordinary programme of greening cities I guess we've seen ever. I think that's kind of really exciting, but you can't do that. Doesn't happen by accident. That's not something that you just, that has to be planned. And I think there's the idea of seeing planning as a positive tool for dealing with that. I'm not talking about a statutory planning system before everyone falls off their chair. I'm talking about the idea of planning, what planning can do, if you like, as a philosophy of organisation, thinking about how we're going to live. Statutory planning systems got all sorts of problems. But unless you've got that guiding hand, I don't think cities do have a future. But I am worried about low demand cities and towns. I'm worried about ex-industrial town centres. I'm worried about what their future is, because those inequalities are still there, aren't they? They're underlying. Unless we do something about those inequalities, we simply won't have achieved what we need to achieve. So their civic space is really important.
Great, thank you. David.
Yeah, there's a number of kind of issues that have been discussed there by all of the contributors, and I think I agree with all of them. I think they're all very sensible points. I mean, I'm always confused by this question in a way, because it seems as if since the beginning of the pandemic, there's been lots of questions asked in a kind of hot takeaway about, are people going to move out of cities? And the real answer is we don't know. You know, we're literally still in a lockdown. It's really difficult to project forward. I think people are broadly right in terms of their instinct, in terms of some people will want to come back into cities, and I think that will be contextual on what cities. I think some cities will do really well. London, for instance, is an international, really dense, kind of super connected city. People will want to come here from all parts of the UK, but also all parts of the world. That will just happen, you know, Brexit or not, or you know, other international kind of imperatives or not. So I think there will be cities that will benefit from this. People will go away, and people will want to come back and kind of reestablish some of the benefits that they enjoyed previously. But also, I think, as Linda was saying, there will be lots of people who will also take that opportunity. You know, people want to mix more. They want to connect with other people, but they will also suddenly recognize the kind of value in those quieter moments where you get to retreat into your own space and into a bit of privacy and away from cities. And I think that balance is always there. I think there is a different challenge in other cities where they were already declining pre-pandemic, and we were trying to think about ways in which kind of that can happen. But also another point I want to make about cities and high streets in particular, these kind of hubs where that we're really talking about, where these kind of connections can happen the most, is that there's a large constituency of people who can't move, who don't have the opportunity or the resources to get up and leave the city and go somewhere else. And if they did, they wouldn't be able to travel in very effectively. There are real big challenges for transport and for public transport because of the lost revenues over the last year or so. And we've got to make cities work for those people going forward. And I think that actually is one of the reasons why I kind of completely agree with what Hugh was saying, because and others have said actually just prior to this call, there's a whole thing about permitted development rights, and literally, frankly, creating new slums is I don't need to say it because I don't actually think I've ever been on a panel where anyone thought it was a good idea, and I'm wondering what the kind of impetus is behind that, and what we do about it, and how we kind of manage that process, because it does seem to be what's happening in our kind of governance framework. It's then flown into our planning framework. How do we respond to that in the way that cities are going to kind of pragmatically and practically move ahead on a day-to-day basis? So decisions that people are making, business decisions people are making now and in the future, are they making, it's almost a question for other panelists, are they making those based on the idea that you're going to have lots of commercial developments that are going to be transformed into housing? I'm a housing architect. I can tell you that's a terrible idea for a lot of reasons. How is the space around that? How's the public realm around that expected to respond to that? And how does it best do that and make the best of what's going to be a bad case?
And I think, David, if I may, Joanne, I mean, if you take sort of what Harworth does, we take former industrial sites, and we basically sort of master plan them, invest in the infrastructure, and transform them into places where people genuinely do want to live, and employment is created and work there as well. If you took the site of the former Orgreave Colliery and coking works, which closed in 1990, so this is, I think, my point about how long it might actually take to regenerate and change sort of what happens in cities properly, is it's a long time. So 1990 that closed. If you look at where we are today, we have about 2,000 jobs on site, and that is anticipated to grow to 4,000 by the time we've finished the development, and they're high quality jobs. So this is like, advanced materials, companies like McLaren and Boeing and Rolls-Royce and others, Sheffield University are there. If you look at the housing, the residential side of what's been developed, we've got 1,000 families living on there. We've built and opened the first school. We're very focused on creating community spaces, the next 500. houses are under development, but that's actually, there's still another sort of couple of thousand houses to go. But we've created country parks. We have, sort of re-landscape what was formerly like, sort of slag heaps and tips. We've increased the biodiversity. We've created, sort of places where people can walk, where kids can play, and actually sort of really looked at the, not just the environment that we've created holistically, but actually sort of how the communities work. We work really closely with a number of different house builders who've brought forward development on site to also evolve the product, actually, sort of from where we first started to where we are today. And I think, and a lot of sort of different types of product in there. So to me, when you think about a business like us, and that's how we plan and bring forward new development, new community, actually you've got to overlay, and we've got to hold ourselves, I think, to a really high standard in terms of what we do in town centres. If we're going to start to bring, a lot more residential in, and different types of residential, but also to the points that have been made around, sustainability and climate change, and I think they've got to be commutable. Cities have got to be really user friendly and really commutable as well.
Thank you, Linda. Jessica, I think did you want to come into that?
Yeah, I mean, we may get onto this later in the discussion, but for me, listening to this conversation, really the thing that will make the difference here is around, yes, planning, but and Hugh's definition of planning and thinking about the future, but really placing that as a vision for a place and having a way of holding true to that for a very long period of time. And we all will have examples of really great reimagining and redevelopment and bringing forward of new communities of different types, but that's all required. I think all of the best ones will have been where there has been a really clear sense of vision and purpose that's been able to be held to for a long period of time. And I think one of the things that's going to be critical to that is capacity within the public sector and capacity within local authorities, and to be able to help, to play a full part in that, and not, to get spooked along the way, or, do things that are short-term wins, but long-term don't support where their communities need them to be. So I think there is something around capacity of local authorities that has been, we know all the reasons why, but has really become degraded over time. But the absolute critical value of that to the long-term future of places.
That's really helpful. And I think if I can just interject for a second, I think one of the things that's coming around with this we sort of look at, and particularly in planning, is we talk a lot about place shaping and placemaking. And I wonder whether there's almost too much pressure on place and not enough on people, and talking about society. And I think we've looked at a lot of our developments that have been successful are often those ones that have a very strong, modern parlance social value that's inherent through the threads of that, whereas those principles of what they want to deliver is very strong in the first instance. And taking your point, Linda, it might take, quite a long time to get to the end point, and it doesn't matter if it slightly shifts and evolves through it, as long as you stay to the heart of what you're trying to achieve through perhaps purpose of that place and vision. Ian, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, it was just really to sort of segue off of Jessica and Linda's remarks, and to say that, in regenerating our towns and cities, the private sector investment is going to have to play an important part. The public sector can't do it by itself. And, as the representative of long-term investors, my members are not going to sort of sign up to visions that are sort of here today and gone tomorrow. The long-term investment that they want to put into place is dictated by that long-term vision that places have. And so that's, I think, really important.
Yeah. Linda, did you want to pick anything else up on that in terms of maybe kind of thinking about ownerships or funding or anything like that in terms of delivering a vision and the ability? Oh, you're on mute, mate.
I thought I clicked, so I was having. There's 2 points I was going to make. I mean, one is about, we've also got to think about, sort of who we're developing for. And I've got a big bee in my bonnet about them at the moment, about young people, the young people that are coming through sort of this pandemic, have had, a really difficult time, difficult ride. It's, we've seen social inequalities exposed like we've never seen them sort of before. We have had education systems that have been disrupted. We've got job markets that are disrupted, and actually, young people are sort of really sort of taking a hit on this. They are the future consumers for whatever we create in a town centre, in a city centre, in a development like I've just been describing, sort of at Waverley. And they are far more environmentally savvy. They are far more digitally savvy. They care far more, not just about what the product is, but who has created it. So the who and the values are really important. So I think we've actually got to start to bring that into the fabric of actually how we imagine places and how we create places, and not ignore, they're often ignored, this group, but sort of make them 35, and what, they're the customers that you actually sort of want when they're sort of coming in to buy or to do your product. So I think that's the sort of first point. The second point on from a who owns it. So lots of town centres, in particular city centres, are in multiple ownership. You don't have that single ownership. You're going to have a lot of investors that have taken a real hit at the moment, particularly if they've got sort of retail or hospitality and leisure sort of assets. And their ability, I think, to invest is going to be constrained, and to repurpose is going to be constrained. So in thinking through how you really sort of catalyze this, sort of, you've got to, there has to be an understanding. It's not just about, sort of saying, right, we're going to sort of introduce sort of PDR, you sort of get on with it. Actually, I think there may well be a real difficulty for some current asset owners to be able to sort of put the capital in to sort of change the use in any meaningful way. Or to a standard or a quality that actually, sort of, I think we need going forward.
Great, thank you, Linda. Did anyone want to come back on that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think it's interesting to talk about is that I think the property sector also has to articulate better its kind of positive visions for public-private partnerships. I think everybody agrees with the kind of need for public-private partnership. You can't do things without an element of cost subsidy. There isn't enough, there simply isn't enough money, there aren't enough funds, and there's a lot to do. And everybody accepts that. I think everybody here will be familiar with the patchy outcomes from a lot of that, though. I mean, in my entire life, there have been various cycles of public partnership that have been disastrous for the public purse. Actually, it's been a really bad deal for the public. They've not been kind of very public in that partnership at all. Schools kind of, schools, libraries, hospitals, and so forth over the last 20, 25, 30 years. So it's not a new thing, but I am aware that there are people out there in the kind of in the marketplace who are really kind of focused on this and understand it as kind of beneficial for their business model. I don't think that's everybody, and there are numerous examples that where I belong to a program in the GLA called Good Growth by Design, and it's about focusing on this specific issue. Is that how do you get people to come in and understand the benefit in the long term, and understand that actually they have to give a little. There is an element of redistribution in this, but what that means is in the long term, companies get a lot back, cities get a lot back, it creates more opportunities. I'm actually really kind of hopeful and confident that there will be all sorts of new entrepreneurs that will kind of occupy high streets in various myriad different ways we haven't even thought of yet, and come up with different ideas and engage people in lots of different ways. But they're almost, people like them and actually people like us as designers are often working from a point of view of mitigating a framework that is there, the kind of strictures and constraints that are on us already. And actually, I'm not sure that we have a broad enough discussion. Perhaps Hugh's got something to say about this, and kind of a utopian vision that's been mentioned by Jessica before about what's possible and how that is beneficial for everybody in long. It's a win-win-win if we do it correctly. And I know that certainly everybody on this call is kind of on board with that, but I'm not sure that everybody else is that tends to kind of be involved in these conversations quite a lot and have quite a lot of power over dictating what happens from it.
Thank you, David. Hugh, do you want to respond?
I want to respond quickly just with a deep sense of frustration, because if you listen to this conversation, there's so much agreement between the sectors, isn't there, about how the subtleties and the holistic need and the importance of private and public money working together, the importance of people. Why the hell is that message not getting through to number 10, who is just about to implement the biggest deregulation of change of use to PDR, Class C to PDR that we've ever seen, which will essentially knock all of this good work on the head? And I think the staggering thing about that is that I thought, and Ian, it's interesting, this, isn't it? Because we've been in conversation about when can we reach a point where you get that unified call from environment, business sectors, from social sectors saying, actually, while we don't agree on everything, there is a core piece of territory that we do agree on. And that consensus could be really important for the future of town centres. It could get us out of a divisive debate and into actually some common themes, some common policies about it. That's really what we need from government. But if you're going to run the future of policy making simply by pressing the deregulatory pedal because it's apparently easy to do that, then we're going to pay a very long-term price in terms of slum housing and the deregulation of town centres. So I'll make this public plea for why we can't all come together and get Number 10 to think again.
Excellent, thank you, Hugh. Ian, you look like you wanted to comment.
Yeah, no, Hugh is absolutely right, and yeah, we collaborated recently on a letter which was signed, I think, by 27 different organisations on the permitted development right. Yeah, we're Town and Country Planning Association did a very good piece of work, Rainsford Review, a couple of years ago, which we were delighted to participate in. So yeah, there is quite a lot of I think collaboration there. I don't know the answer to why the government. I can only assume a combination of at this point lack of money and panic, and that's not a great place, I don't think. To and there's almost a sort of a conflict in government policy between sort of build on one side and wanting to build back better on the other. And I think the vast majority of organisations I talk to are very much in the build back better. Clearly, yes, we want to ensure that the construction and development industries are able to do their bit to contribute to the recovery, but not at the expense of the long term and the kinds of places that people want.
Great, thank you, Ian. We've had a question come in, and actually it's one that I had on my list, so so helpful to sort of touch on this, and that's really about if we just take us back to residential in town centres. We've heard about whether the route to that is necessarily the right one, but just recognising about what that provision looks like or what it should look like. The question very much talks about sort of current patterns of housing. Is that semi-detached suburbia? Do we need new models? Who needs it? Picking up your point, Linda, about who are we listening to? Who are the people that want to take this forward? And particularly, what's really come out of the last year is, space standards, intergenerational living, all those kind of things. And how do we make sure that's the right tenure, the right type is coming into our town centres, or at least the provision generally. David, I wonder if your background, you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, I think we do need new models and new typologies that address all of these issues. I think there is an appetite out there for it, but there is also an appetite for an existing model of houses. So that's the first thing. Just in terms of strictly space standards, one of the very obvious reasons why building in office blocks, or even actually just converting buildings that are made for strict private development into social or more affordable housing doesn't always work, is because of the basic space standards that you need, the basic way that those are serviced and looked after, in a really simple way. If you live in the Barbican, you've got a concierge that will look after everything and make sure it's all tough and neat and tidy. If you don't have a concierge there because the local council doesn't have enough money, or because the local housing provider can't afford it, or because the service charge will go up for the residents, that key critical piece of management disappears. That means that the development that you've got there will kind of slowly deteriorate because nobody is looking after it. Or if you've got a permitted development units that are really, really tiny, it means that people can't live in them for a long time. So you get a massive transient population. Massive transient population has less incentive to look after it as they go through. Things rapidly deteriorate again. So basically, all we're putting in are these kind of perverse incentives for spaces that are going to deteriorate over time. And unless the kind of model is they deteriorate, and we can, gain more, we can, spend more money on them and earn more money out of regenerating them again, because there is a kind of relatively regular regeneration cycle, which is really perverse in an age when we're talking about a climate emergency and we're trying to save resources. To be building things to last for no more than 30 years before we have to regenerate them again is really massively wasteful in terms of energy, treasure, resources, all these sorts of ways. So I think there is I've slightly lost my track. I think I've gone off on one, so forgive me. I'll let somebody else come in there.
David, I was enjoying the track you were going about. I was on board the train with you, quite happily.
Forgive me.
Waving at the back. Good. No, David, that was great. Thank you very much. But I wonder if we go on to Jessica. You sort of certainly talked about the sort of customer-focused part of your business, and whether there's expertise and experience you've got in terms of, you know, how we can kind of manage this better.
Yeah, I mean, we're not a housing developer, but we do recognise the role of housing within our developments. And so actually really thinking about how you put these pieces of the jigsaw together in a way that really stimulates communities. And I think part of why why this matters to us is, you know, we've worked deeply in a relatively small number of cities over times when we've seen them really change. So in Manchester, through from the late 80s and the impacts of the industrial decline that had happened in the 30, 40, 100 years before that, I suppose, and through to today, and recognising how much you needed that mix of people living in desirable places in the city centre, different people being able to live in the city centre, and in the surrounding areas, the requirement for infrastructure which allows people to move into this, you know, come and move between the places they live and the places that they work, and creating something that's fundamentally interesting. So I think that, you know, seeing how that fits together as part of what you're shaping is really important. And I'm going to use an example here of last year, about this time last year, we created a joint venture with Trafford Council and bought Stretford Mall and part of Altrincham Town Centre, and those are very different places. And for anyone who knows Manchester, Stretford Mall is on the in Trafford, a couple of miles out from the city centre, not very attractive shopping mall from the 60s. And actually what we've done there is really spend a lot of time talking to community and the different communities that use that about what it is that they want, and not what is it you want from your shopping centre, but what do you want, and really open questions about what's important to the way they live and what would make that a great place. And actually there's a real commercial value in doing that, because if we can align our products with what people want, you're going to end up with a much more, you know, you end up with something that works for your community and works for you as a business. And within Stretford, we're looking at how you bring housing close into that, you reimagine the space, recreate High Street. That's something that people have really talked about and are very invested in, the people who live there. And you know, we've been lucky in a way in terms of timing, because people have been using their local facilities in a new way and being able to see the opportunity that brings for them. So I think that really open engagement to really understand what's at the root of what people are telling you, I think is critical as we move forward. And you can translate that. That's a sort of one example of where you do it. Linda talked about her examples, but you can translate that into many different places. And I suppose the last thought I have on that, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is about creating interesting and mixed places, and that avoids that transience that David talked about. It avoids something becoming very stuck or becoming sort of disconnected from its local area, either because it's so much more of a wealthy place or so much more of a deprived place. Those isolated, those homogenous places are the least good, I think, to operate in.
Thanks, Jessica. I've got a linked question, but before I go on to that, does anyone else want to come in?
Sorry, I just remembered why I lost my track.
I'm back on the train, David.
Okay. I'm back on the train, and it was just to reiterate what Jessica's been saying in many ways. That the purpose of mixed typologies is to get these mixed places, and at the end of that, what you can do around it. So it's not the panacea, but it's part of the answer. It's part, some of these units in some of these developments where you've got offices converted into new homes is part of the answer. It's just not the panacea, and I can't understand for the life of me why anybody would look at it as the panacea. But there are also other benefits to that. So if you can get that mix right, you can get, artists, creators, middle income, higher income, lower income. That's when you get beneficial places. Those are the sorts of people that you need to get a kind of mixed ecosystem of people in there that makes it a desirable place. It makes it a kind of a local place that people feel that there's a sense of community and that they can see people like them, but they can also see people, they can also meet people. That's really kind of useful in terms of cohesion. We call it a public life strategy, and we're doing a scheme at the moment for Enfield Borough Council in London for Meridian Water. We talk about it as a public life because in your kind of high street, in your public spaces is where you meet other people, where you have convivial contact. The pandemic before this was a pandemic of loneliness. It's where you feel safe. It's where you access vital services. It's where there's exchange, there's adaptability, there's opportunity for employment. All these things are really kind of crucial, but it's not just housing. It can't possibly be just housing because that creates a separate type of kind of ghetto that we've been talking about.
Great, thank you, David. That's brilliant. I just wanted to sort of link that in through sort of technology and, sort of the quick change we've all experienced over the last year with remote working and how the technologies kind of plugged that gap. Although it didn't give us really a good snow day, did it? So I was a bit disappointed about that, but that's for another session. So the question really is that, whilst the sort of mechanics of the planning system have worked really well with, inquiries and committees and things like that, what about kind of engagement? We've gone virtual with our consultation, but do we think as though, that technology has bridged a gap in terms of the customers or the people that we're engaging with and targeting to kind of ask the questions and get their input? Or do we think there's still more to do in those areas?
I think, Joanne, it's a forgotten part of the white paper, really, that was that sort of digitisation strand. Obviously, digitisation of the planning system is has to be inclusive. You've got to have multi-channels. It can't leave anybody behind. The big problem, the bit that I've sort of seen from a sort of policy perspective is. I think the Royal Town Planning Institute sort of says it costs something like 500 million to digitise the planning system. At the last spending review, I think government gave 12 million. So, if we're to move to that sort of innovation where we can get, we've been discussing young people, where we can really enthuse them and get them involved in the system, then it is going to need more investment. Just on the last question as well, as my work over the last decade has been trying to get the build to rent sector established, and from a supply side, it's extremely difficult with a sort of top down planning system to get that sort of innovation and change. And build to rent wouldn't have really got off the ground if it hadn't been for a few visionary local planners who went out on a limb really and decided they'd do something different. Saw that their local communities needed a different housing offer that was going to meet their needs. So it's extremely difficult to sort of change that super tanker around in terms of national policy. We'd probably still be waiting if we'd wanted to get the build to rent sector started from a sort of top down approach.
Thank you, Ian. We've got another question come in, but Linda, I think you wanted to comment before I go on to that.
I did, because actually one of the things that the pandemic has that I think has been really exciting, that has come out of what has been a really terrible time, has actually been almost in one foul swoop, the majority of the nation had to go digital. So whether you were working, whether you were communicating, my parents are in their 80s, they're using Zoom, and I would never ever have put money on that if you'd asked me a year ago. The way that we are connecting is really different. It's exposed a divide in terms of people who don't have the devices that they need for their children to do their schoolwork, or to communicate sort of with their families. But the reality of it is we have just crossed a Rubicon, I think, as a society, in terms of actually the digital bit has really now invaded everybody's home, and people can see different ways of using it and different ways of applying it. And I think actually from a planning perspective, that is really quite exciting, because it means that we should be able to engage more with the people who we need to consult with the people whose views and opinions you want if you're developing products and services. and actually do it in a far more sort of efficient and effective way. So I think this has to be looked at, because I think we've jumped to a place that nobody really saw coming as a society where digital is concerned. I think the other side of that is, which is a much bigger planning and infrastructure sort of point, is therefore our digital networks and infrastructure in the UK needs to be really focused on, and again, sort of optimized and made equal, because there are still parts of the country and there are still parts of some cities where digital access is actually sort of really difficult. So I think there's a potentially really exciting thing come out of something really horrible, but we need to sort of work our way sort of through and plan it to make sure that we can actually use it really beneficially.
Linda, thank you. Okay, let me go to the audience question before we need to sort of do our individual summaries and wrap up, as we're shooting through the time. And that's really a question around devolution. And if I can find it again. Where's it gone? Here we go. Talking about the challenges and opportunities of local leadership will be critical, and how does devolution fit into the debate about delivery, recovery, and levelling up? Who wants to go for that one first?
Well,
you go on.
I'll do it very quickly because I know time is short. I mean, the paradox is that devolution is a fantastic idea, but there are two forces at work in government that just won't join up, which is a lot of rhetoric about devolution and then a massive centralisation of planning powers. So you can devolve powers, let's do it to a city centre. Can I ask everyone, what do they think the point of a local plan is after PDR? What do you actually control through a local plan in the city centre area? Because the vast majority of it is now PDR, isn't it? So you've got two things working at once. The point is that I do not believe that there is a rhetorical commitment to devolution, which I think is very positive, which you've got to give. You've got to give local government their power back. Frustrating though that can be if you don't happen to agree with them at any particular time. But in this country, the reason European cities work better is they've got more levers to pull. And our cities don't have those levers. So it's very obvious about why we're not getting the change that we need. But that requires Whitehall to be just re-engineered, doesn't it? Because devolution is the talk, but there is always a sense of drawing back power to the centre. We've got to get that culture ironed out in the process.
Hugh, thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, I think there is clearly something about drawing power back to the centre. We can see this is very central. There's been a very centralist approach to the pandemic, and actually, as there have been more localist approaches, you can see you can be more tailored, you can respond more nimbly, and actually you can get much closer to your communities. And there are lessons we can draw for that across all sorts of policy areas. But the other point I think that's really important to remember in this is that government is hugely siloed, and we've had a few examples come up through this panel where there are tensions in government. It's not just tensions, they are hard walls between government departments and government priorities. And I don't think in the 10 years since I last worked in central government, more than 10 years since I last worked in central government, that's got very much better at all. And that is one of the great disappointments of this re-engineering of the state devolution debate. And I think we need to continue to push radically for devolution to places, because you can join up ideas, vision, delivery, plans, what people need in a much more fundamental and meaningful way.
Great, thank you, Jessica. Does anyone want to give a final?
As I say, I absolutely agree with what Jessica's just said. I think it's not just about the devolution of power, it's about the devolution of funding, because actually the regions know best where to put that money to work. They'll have to work within a framework. I think everybody will accept that, but actually it's not just the power. They've got to actually have, the funding and the ability to raise funding and retain funding and recycle funding. So the sort of two things go hand in hand.
Thank you, Linda. Okay, so we're on to the final sum up question for you all in the last few minutes, and thank you for those who submitted questions. That was really, really helpful. There's a couple we haven't got to, but I'm sure the adjudicators will come back on those. So the question really is that you're standing outside 10 Downing Street, or maybe 11 with the Rishi's magic money tree, but you've got a magic wand in your hand and probably a megaphone. What are you asking of government? So if I go around you all in turn, you've got a kind of minute each. Who should I go first? Ian.
Yeah, for me, I suppose it's that the government doesn't get so fixated with housing numbers that it forgets that communities are far more than that, and economies rely on people having jobs to pay their rents and their mortgages. And I was deeply disappointed with the planning white paper. There was not a single mention of the words commercial property within it. And so I hope government uses the opportunity of the rest of this year to think about almost a planning white paper too that focuses on jobs and that economic activity and how we stimulate that, and not just the housing that we often see.
Great, thanks, Ian. David.
I think mine is kind of an addendum to the last question, actually. So it's about smaller units. So it's not necessarily in terms of the governance. I think others are much better placed to speak about those than me. But in terms of smaller units of space that are locally administered, but that are connected to broader kind of networks and big networks, I think it is important. If you're in a city that was already, or a town that was already declining, somewhere outside of London before the pandemic, you still have those same issues about transport infrastructure. You still have those same issues about accessibility, but you've got newer kind of concerns about being able to have services, vital services, infrastructure, jobs, connections with other people on your doorstep as well. So I think the idea of that is becoming newly fashionable, because it's been around for a long time, of the 15-minute city and 15-minute town, this access-driven model is really important, and there's a reason for that.
Thank you. Linda.
So I'm going to greedy, I'm two, but they're both very quick. One is, my big ask would be that any centrally derived targets or levies support rebalancing in the regions and actually don't incentivise the wrong behaviour or disincentivise development. I think that's really important. But the other one, which is sort of linked, is, don't let planning reform and this new white paper be an excuse for local authorities to basically stall their current local plans or actually sort of pause them. It's really important that we keep going.
Thank you. Jessica.
I'm going to be very quick. Focus on sustainability and support and encourage partnerships for place.
That was quick. Well done. Hugh.
Well, I'll try and be equally quick. Listen to the expertise in the sector, understand the challenges, and base planning reform on the human experience, because this is our last chance to get this right. And in terms of COP26 and climate change, this is the choice that they confront. So stop deregulating planning and recognise that when done well, it's just a brilliant solution to the problem.
Great, thank you very much, Hugh, and well done. We're exactly on time, which is just where I like to be. But thank you for your time today. I thought that was a really good, healthy discussion we had, and lots of ideas coming forward. I hope everyone who's watched has got a lot out of that and has been taking a lot of that on board. And I would have thought this group would do quite well on a new project. So I'll put you together in a room with a pilot study and see where we get to. I think that would be pretty good to see what would come out with. And perhaps we can send that to the government and get them into. Right, so over to you, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, and thank you very much to our panel for what I think is a really important discussion. We have 2 more sessions taking place this afternoon. They should appear on the screen shortly. We have Diamond Discovery, which is taking place between 2 p.m. and 3 p.m, and then moving over to Suffolk, making a claim for post-COVID, which is taking place between 3 and 4 p.m. Registration links are on our website, realestatelive.co.uk. So I hope you can tune into one of them sessions. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope to see you again later today or tomorrow. Thank you.